Hello, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. So today we're going to do some gridding. We're going to use Procreate because it's so easy to use Procreate to do it. But I did say I would show you how to do it on paper. So I'll start off just by explaining how we do it on paper. But then we'll switch to Procreate and we'll draw Sa. I don't know how you pronounce his name, but we'll draw, yeah, I'll call him Sa. We'll draw Sa using a grid. I don't know how far we'll get, but I mean, we should certainly get the line drawing done. I don't know how far we'll get in terms of colouring, but we'll see. So I'm just going to switch. Yes, because I was going to show you. So if you're going to grid up with paper, there are lots of tools you can use which will help you to do it, lots of online tools. So this is a grid that I created in Procreate actually, and I just did it in Procreate. I screenshot it and then I printed it out on, I had loads of these old acetates because I used to teach in the days before computers and I have a stack of them. We used to use overhead projectors, but you can buy these. I've checked, they're still available. They're very inexpensive and they go in any inkjet printer, so you can just print a grid and use that if you want to. You will have to draw the grid in your sketchbook. If you're going to use a sketchbook, you'll just have to draw it with a ruler and pencil. So we just draw this one. I think I'm just trying to remember how big my squares are. They're an inch, so that's an inch square. So you would then draw a grid by hand in your sketchbook. It doesn't have to be the same size, it could be smaller. It's just that your picture will come out smaller, but that's fine. So if you've got a smaller sketchbook, you just need to draw it with the same number of squares across, so you can reduce the size. So if this is an inch, probably if you were using a 8x5 sketchbook, you could do them half an inch. So if you just did it with half-inch squares, you could then copy this. You could use the grid in your sketchbook, but you'll have to draw that grid in your sketchbook. You can print out grids on paper. So I found an app which I've referenced in the resource materials for this class, and I've put the link for the resource materials in the chat, but it's also on Mighty Networks in the resource materials. So I'm just going to switch to my screen view. Yeah, this is a website called, there are lots of them. If you just Google drawing grids, you'll find lots. And if you put in free drawing grids, you'll find lots of free ones. This one is gridraw.net. And I've put that in the resources as well, so you can find it. It talks about downloading apps, but you have to pay if you download the apps. But if you do it on the website, you don't have to pay. You just upload your image and it will print it out with a grid on it. You can choose the size of the grid, exactly the same as we're going to do in Procreate. You basically make the same choices, but you can then print it out with the grid on it. And if you wanted to do that for your drawing paper, if you really don't want to sit and grid, you could just print out a plain sheet as well with the drawing. So don't put a photo in, or I think you have to include a photo, but you could just do a photo of a blank page and it will then print out the drawing grid. So you just literally add them up here. Obviously, if you get the app, you can do more. It's more complicated. So if you've got an Android phone, can't use Procreate for some reason, you can use one of their apps. But if you want it for free, you can get it for free. A lot of these drawing things, they have options where you have to pay, but you can usually also, there's usually a basic free option, and they have got a tutorial showing you how to do it. But the process will be very similar to what we're doing with Procreate today. So I'm just going to move my grid out of the way. So let's switch to Procreate. So my iPad, as usual, is plugged in to my computer because you can't use it easily. You can't see it with the overhead lights if I don't have the screen directly linked. So let me just switch to that view. So no, that's my camera. That's not what I want. That's what I want. I was already on that view and I forgot. So I need to change my iPad to Procreate. There we are. So I'm going to go through the whole process step by step. I have put instructions as well as a separate PDF in the resource article on drawingXpressions. So you can go and find it there, and you'll have I think there's 10 steps I've set out. just because if you get lost in the process, it's much easier if you've got a set of written instructions. And also later, when you're trying to remember how to do it, rather than having to rewatch the whole class, you can just go through the instructions and hopefully they'll work. So I'm going to start with creating a canvas. So let me just turn the pointer on here so I can point. I always forget where it is. There it is. So we're going to create a canvas up here, and I want a canvas that's 8 by 12. I've already got one that's 8 by 12, but I'll show you the process from the start for creating one. So you need to tap on this little folder with a plus in it. And from here, you can choose exactly what size you want your canvas. You can choose in millimeters, centimeters, inches, or pixels. I tend to use inches. So if you just tap on that inches, then you'll notice that up here, we've got inches. We had pixels a minute ago, but now we have inches. So I usually use a European A4, which is more or less 8 by 12. So I'm going to say 8 inches across. So you just put 8 in there, and then you want to put 12 in here. As soon as you tap on it, the number that's there disappears. So you can just put in 12. Don't worry about the DPI. This is the number of layers. So I have it on 300 DPI because 300 is usually the minimum for a high quality picture. So I never change it from 300. And this is the number of layers. So I have this is a large iPad. So you might have, if you've got a small one, you might have a different number of layers. I think that's how it works. I'm not 100%, but that tells you how many layers you can have. I don't think I've ever used 58 layers anyway. I think 20 is probably 20, 25, the most that I do. So once you've set this up as 8 by 12, you can just click create. You could have named it as well, actually, which I didn't do. But it gives you an option to name it. So then I've got my canvas. I'm going to make it a bit smaller. And then the first thing we need to do is import. Sorry, I've lost my instructions. So now we've got our canvas, we need to import the photo that we're going to draw from. So you need to go into this menu here, the spanner menu, and click on add. And then insert a photo. And then hopefully the photo is in your library. It's in my library there. And if you just tap it, it will appear on your canvas. And we want it to fill the canvas. So you need to go down here and tap on fit to canvas, and it will then fill the page. So there we have him. I might make him a little bit bigger just so I don't have a bit more of his face. So to do that, you just hold the canvas with 2 fingers. And if you have, a finger and a thumb, if you have a finger and a thumb on it, you can move it around so it's like you can pinch it and increase it and just move it around in the canvas. So it doesn't really matter what size canvas you have, unless you're going to print. So that's I'm slightly not straight. So I'm just going to straighten it up a bit. Still not straight. Maybe I'm not going to worry about getting it straight because it's going to take me too long. Actually, the easiest way is if you manage to rotate it while you're pinching it, if you just tap on the green button here, a tiny little green button, it will come up with this box, and you can just put in 0, and then it will remove the rotation. So it's just removed the rotation that I did, which I often do when I'm pinching things. I find it really hard to then get them straight, but you can just move it off. And then if you just tap on your screen, it'll disappear. So, and then you need to just tap this arrow so that it doesn't move anymore once you're happy with it. So now we're going to go back up here. So back up to the spanner. And then you want canvas, which is the second thing in the second menu along. And then down here, we want the drawing guide. And you want to edit the drawing guide. So if you tap edit, this is what appears. So I've got tiny, tiny little squares, which I really don't want. I like to work from quite big squares. So you can work from tiny squares if that's what you want. I just find it easier to use big ones. So it should automatically be on 2D grid. That's what it usually opens on, which is what we want. But here, I want to make the squares a lot bigger. So if you tap on the PX there, it will give you the option of changing it to inches. So I like to work, as I said, in inch grids. So I'm going to change it to inches. So you just tap on inches and then close it off. Done. Oh, no, I didn't mean to close it off. Sorry, I'm going to reopen it again. So go back here. I forgot the next stage. Edit drawing guide again. And yeah, now it says we have 0 inches. You want to change that to whatever size you want. I usually use 2 inches. So I'm going to tap there and I'm going to put in 2 inches and then press done. So now I have, you can see that because we're 8 by 12, you might not be able to see, but we have 4 squares across and 6 going down, which is more or less perfect from my perspective. You can make them smaller. If it's easier for you to have 1-inch squares, make them 1 inch. But the next thing we need to do is make the grid really visible because it's not very visible. So I would normally increase the thickness and increase the opacity. And then you get a really visible grid. So there's no reason not to have them turned all the way up. You can also, if you see that little dot there, you can move that along here to change the color. So it might be, maybe you're drawing something that's very dark. It might be that you find having a white grid easier. So you can change it to white. You can change it to whatever color suits you. I'm going to stick with black, but you don't have to. Change it to whatever you suit. And the dot in the middle represents the center of the canvas. So once you get to there, we can click done. So now we want this photo with the grid on it because we're going to work from it. If you share a photo, if you share a drawing, anything with the drawing grid on, the drawing grid doesn't appear. So because it doesn't appear, there's no point us sharing it, wanting to see the grid. The way to make the grid visible is to screenshot it. So screenshot on an iPad is the power button and the top, I think, volume button. I'm just going to click those and check. Oh, it's quite awkward for me to get to them from where I'm sat. Yeah, we are. Yes. So it's if you have to press together at the same time, the power button and the top volume button, and you get a screenshot, which has just disappeared, which I didn't want to do. So I'm going to do it again. It will be somewhere, but I don't want to spend time hunting for it. So screenshot it and then tap on the screenshot as soon as you've got it, because otherwise you have to go and find it in your files. And then this is a crop box. So you just hold one of the corners, either with your pencil or your finger, and move it till it lines up with the drawing. I mean, you can leave a little border if it's easier. And then I'll do the same. So I started from that corner. Now I'm going to use my finger to move down from this corner. And I'm just trying to get, I'll leave a little border around. Doesn't matter if there's a border. So there's our photo. Done. So once you press done, you want to save it to your photos because you're going to import it as a reference in a minute. So now here you want to go up here again on the spanner and you want to choose canvas and reference. So if you tap here, that will turn on. Although that is a picture of him, we don't want to use that picture, partly because it doesn't have a grid on it, but that box actually shows us what we're drawing. We don't want to see, I don't want to see what I'm drawing. So I'm going to click image, which is the middle one. And then you import the image from your library. And there's the photo with the squares on it. Okay, so now what we want here is a blank canvas just with the squares. So we're going to go up to the layer menu. We're almost done, I promise. Go up to the layer menu, add a layer. So tap on the plus there to add a layer. And then we're going to delete this layer. So you're just going to move it to the left and click delete. And what you're left with is a canvas. And the reason I do it that way is the canvas we know is exactly the same size. The squares are exactly the same as on his face. I could have gone and created a new document, but then I'd have to create a new canvas. Doing it this way, you don't need to create a new canvas. You can just delete the photo and you know your canvas is there and it's the right size. It has the right number of squares. Everything about it is good. So if you want to increase the size of this to draw from, you just pull down on the corner here. It's not going to go any bigger, I don't think. I think it's as big as it will go. Yes, I can't get it to go any bigger. So, but I'm going to try and line it up so it's more or less alongside this. So the center is more or less on the straight line. I think it is. I think the center of this center line is parallel with this center line. Yeah, parallel? I don't know. But they line up, so it makes it easier to draw. So now all you have to do is draw. We have the grid, we can draw. So I'm just going to choose, in the sketching set, I'm going to use the Procreate pencil. You can use any color you like. And we're just going to draw, and I'll explain to you how we use the grid to draw, just in case you don't know. So when I was a child, I used to love when you got children's puzzle magazines. I wasn't so interested in the puzzles. I loved the grids, but I never understood. They would be grids, and there'd be a picture next to it, and it would say, draw this from the grid. But I never really understood how you were supposed to do it. So whenever I use it now, I always think about how I tried to do that as a child, but never quite got it. So we're simply going to draw what this grid helps us to do. For me, at least, it helps me to place the features without having to guess. When you've got a blank sheet of paper, you just kind of have to guess where the features are going to sit. If you use a grid, you know exactly where they are. So I will show you how to draw all of him from the grid, but I'm going to start just by showing you how easy it is to place the features if you've got a grid. So if we look at this here, so he has a straight line pretty much through his face. He's got a very symmetrical face. I've not quite got it. Yeah, it's slightly over to the right, maybe my grid, but he has a very symmetrical face. So, and we can tell from here that his glasses cross. So I'm just going to do a little line there. I'll make my line bigger, actually. So I've just put a little line there to show me where his glasses sit. And then you can see that the edge of his glasses kind of is in this second square. And it's kind of about there. So I'm not drawing the whole of the features. I'm just drawing little lines that will help me figure out where to draw them. So the glasses on this side is kind of there. It doesn't matter if it's not 100%. Actually, that's wrong, because I can see that I've got it coming right into this corner. It's not quite in that corner. So it's maybe like there. So his eyebrows sit pretty much halfway through this square. So, and that's where the top of his glasses is. So we can just put a line in here to tell us where it sits. So what we're doing is we're using the grid just kind of as a map. So to kind of help us figure out where to put different features. So his eyes here, they come right to the edge of that grid. So right to there. And they're just a tiny bit. They're kind of around there. I think I've made them a bit too low. So I can now see that my line here for the center of the glasses is a bit too low. So it's more like halfway down. So I'm going to raise it. It's more like halfway down that square because it sits above his glasses, his eyes rather. So I'm just going to put his eyes in. And you can, so his eyes come to maybe halfway across that square. And then we have this part of his glasses. So what I'm doing is using the grid to figure out exactly where, or as exactly as I can, where the different features lie. So that again, I've just gone slightly wrong. So you can just keep adjusting. But in fact, that eye needs to go right the way. As I'm doing it, I can see that I'm making mistakes. So what eraser I've got, it's not working very well. Try again, that's better. So this eye goes pretty much to the edge as well. And then here. And as you add more features, you'll realize that you've drawn some of these features in the wrong place. Don't worry about it. You can just correct them as you go. We're using an iPad. It's so easy to correct things. So I'm going to put in his eyes. So the bottom of his glasses come maybe about a third of the way down these squares. So I'm just going to give myself some lines here. That might be a bit, that one's a bit too low. So then that's helping me kind of draw in the shape of his glasses. So we can do it very sketchily because we're going to do a proper sketch when we finish this. So, and I'm just checking that the center of his glasses is about right. And I think it is. I think maybe there should be a bit more of a space. So I'm going to add more of a space. So come back and perfect all these features later. So now we're going to look at his nose, and that's about 2/3 of the way down that box. So you can just put yourself a little line in to tell you where the nose is. And maybe a little over 1/3 of the way, each of the nostrils. So one there, I think, and one here-ish. And then I'm just going to look at those and see if I'm right, because usually the edge of the nose lines up with the inside of the iris, and that's right, and that's right. So that's where his nose is gonna sit. And then the mouth, which for me is always the hardest part of a face to place, is right on that line. So that makes life a lot easier because I know exactly where his mouth is. And the mouth usually lines up with center. Well, his lines up definitely with the center of his eyes. So this is where his mouth is going to sit. And I'll just give myself a little line for the bottom. He has a moustache in the middle here, between his nose, which comes to around, not quite the edge of each square, so just about there. And then if we go down and look at his chin is just here. So kind of just below the bottom square. So I don't actually have a face yet, but I have lots of marks that tell me where the face is going to sit. So now I'm just going to look at the side of his face. So the side of his face here, I almost always start with the side of the face by the eyes, and I do it in bits. I don't do it in one big circle, because you can get it much more accurate if you look at the angles and the different parts of the faces. So his side of his face here is about there, and on the other side it's about there. And we can adjust all of these if they turn out to be wrong. So then you can see this little angle here. So I'm going to draw that one. So it's kind of like that. And on this side, it's the same. It's kind of like that. And then we can just join those up a bit. And then we had noted where his chin was. I didn't know how wide it was. So I'm just going to look. And if you look at the photo, it lines up pretty much exactly with his nostrils. So that bottom square part. So I'm just going to line that up there, and then I can join the two sides. And when I've done that, I'll then look and check. And how you check on how accurate that is look at the negative space. Have you got an angle here in this square that looks like this? Yeah, just think of them as lines and shapes and angles. And I more or less have. This one is more or less lined up with this one. That one is more or less lined up with that one. I could take hours doing this and make sure they're all totally accurate and completely lined up. I don't do that. I just use them as markers to help. So his chin then, his neck kind of comes down here. So again, I'm using the negative space there. I'm using this kind of angle to figure out where his neck is. On the other side, his neck is just outside that line. And it's not that long. I've got it going really long, and actually it's more like that. So drawing like this will really help you to understand, if you're measuring everything, it'll help you to understand how a face is put together and where the different lines and angles are. So his hair comes basically down to this line here. So I will just add some rough shapes for curly hair. And it goes way up. It goes all the way almost to the top of our canvas. So right up here. Now, if I was drawing it and I wasn't gridding it, I probably would never draw that much hair. But actually his top curls, I mean, I guess the mass of his hair comes to around here. So I'm just going to draw myself a shape so I know where it is. But I would never draw it that high. And I think that's what a grid shows you. A grid shows you that it should be bigger and higher than you've drawn it, than you think it is, rather. So he needs ears. And then we can finish. So his ears, actually, maybe we'll just do the edges of his glasses first, because that will help. So just add in. And they're pretty much halfway up that square. So we'll put those in. I'll just put the lines for them in. And then the ears will sit just below those. Ears are almost always, I know I say this every week, I'm going to say it again, line up with the eyes if the photo is taken straight on, and the bottom of the ears usually line up with the bottom of the nose. So he's a perfect example, because he really does. I quite often draw ears sticking out too much as well. Having a grid helps you realize sort of where they sit in that square. They're about a quarter of the width of the square, so you don't need to draw them as massive as I often do. So the other ear. Oh no, I've gone too low. I can see that. So around there. So these lines are just very loose right now. So I'm going to draw in the lines under his eyes, which sit almost on that bottom line. So, and then I'm just going to rework his nose a bit so that it looks like a nose and not a line. I don't know if I've ever said this, but noses are my favorite feature to draw. I really like them. They're quite simple and they make sense. And when you add color to them, that makes it sort of gives them volume that they don't have before. And I can see that that's not quite, these features don't quite line up right, but I'll figure that out in my second drawing, which will be on top of this. So now I'm going to just add these, the smile lines on the side of his face, because we do want him to look like he's smiling. And this one on this side lines up perfectly with the line. So it's so easy to place. When that happens, if features line up either with these lines or with the corners of the lines, it just makes it so easy to draw. So it helps for me as well to have I don't know what I'm doing at the moment. It helps for me to have something that shows me where to place the mouth, because I struggle with drawing them. So it's just under this line, I guess. And I think this line that I've drawn is maybe not quite the center of his mouth. I'm looking, that's more or less the bottom. So I think I've drawn the top of his mouth too big. So I'm just going to remove that and draw in the bottom so I know where that is. So I've got a top and bottom I can now add in a smiley bit. So, and then I'm just going to add some lines for like where his beard sits, or his stubble. It's like, I can't remember the term for it, 5-day stubble, something like that. So, but it kind of sits around here. And I'm going to draw in that moustache, and that's why I can see that my nose is too low, because I don't have space for the moustache. So I have drawn, yeah, I can see that's meant to be the bottom, and I can see that my lines come down below it. So I'm just going to redraw that nose because it's too low. Maybe I'll put in the moustache first. I've probably done it too big now. I think maybe I have. Make it a bit smaller. So the bottom of the nose is about a quarter of the way up that square. So if I half it and then quarter it, yeah, it's about there. So having just said that noses are my favorite feature to draw, that doesn't mean that I always get them right, because I certainly do. Yeah, it kind of looks like him now, which is reassuring. And then I'm just going to look at where his collar sits. So it sits about there. I love that pearl necklace. I'm not going to draw it. Pearls are really hard to draw so they look even. So I'm not going to. The trick, if you do draw the pearls, is to get the highlight in the right place to give them a sense of volume. But those are tiny pearls and there's a lot of them. That's going to be a lot of drawing. So I think more or less now I have this. I might just try and I haven't drawn his eyebrows. Just going to try and get the shape of the glasses. I really struggle with getting glasses round. I never get totally round. But it doesn't matter if they're not perfectly round. So I think that's about right. And then he's got eyebrows, which I forgot. So we'll just add the eyebrows in. So I thought with colouring, with adding colour today, we'd use the at the bottom of this, the soft pastels here, which are really nice. So I'm going to do my second sketch again using the pencil, because I don't really want an ink line if I'm going to be drawing with pastels. I'd just rather have a something that looks like a coloured line. Also, I found a Procreate website that sells Procreate brushes. So I think I found it the other day, and they're free, and there are some really good sets. So I will share the link for that in the drawingXpressions Mighty Networks site. I'm just thinking, what am I doing? I'm trying to talk about two things at once and I'm forgetting. So now what we're going to do, so I've created another layer because I'm going to create, so just press plus to create another layer. This is the one I'm going to do a better drawing on top of. So now the drawing below, I'm going to lower the opacity of it. So tap the N and lower the opacity so it's quite pale, because then it's much easier to draw on top. Obviously, if you've got it this color, it's quite hard to draw on top because your lines underneath are showing through so strongly. So I lower the opacity usually to somewhere around, I mean, that's about 35%, which is fine. I can see the lines well enough. And yeah, I can draw on top of that. It's generally a good idea to draw with a different color. So your next layer, you can change the colors of the inking, so it doesn't really matter what color you choose right now. So I'm going to go for a sort of browny color. So these are the Procreate palettes, the ones that come with Procreate, which are quite nice. So I've got a brown color. I'm not changing brushes, but I'm just going to try and do a more accurate drawing now. Now I have all my marks in place. So while I'm doing that, I'm not simply just drawing on top of the lines I've already drawn. I'm checking. I'm going to check again this square against that square to see, yeah, to try and be more accurate. And I can see already, I always start with this eye, and I can see already that the glasses are too high. They need to be lower. They need to be straighter. So I just amend that as I go along. So I think they should be somewhere like they're about halfway, and I had them a bit too high. My line is still all wonky. I haven't streamlined this brush either, so I will have wonky lines. But I'm not going to bother streamlining it. But yes, I was saying I found a website. It sells that's run by Procreate, and it sells really nice brushes, and they're free, ostensibly free. When I tried to buy them, I had to pay $2, but I think that's the digital tax that you have to pay because you're in Europe, because it says they're free and then it charged me. But I mean, seriously, it was $2 for each set, and they're very nice. So I think if you're in the US, you probably won't have to pay, because I think they will be free. I mean, $2 is nothing to pay for a really nice set. So I especially like the pencils. So I will share the link. They've got so many sets. I mean, if you can get them for free, you can get as many as you want. I mean, because I did have to pay a couple of dollars for each one. I tried to be limited in how many I bought, but I bought 3 sets of ones that I didn't really have those kinds of brushes already. So I will put that link in the, again, on the Mighty Networks page. If you buy a set and they're really good, please let me know, because I will probably go on and buy them. But until someone else has tested them, you can't always know how good. But the ones I bought a set for cartoon watercolor that I really like. They're very nice. I bought a set of pencils that I really like, because I've just never been able to find color pencils that work like color pencils, and I haven't really had a serious go with these yet, but they look like they might, which is exciting. trying to get the arm of his glasses, but it's quite a strange thing to draw. I feel as well that I've drawn this one smaller than that one. So I think I need to make it bigger. Too busy talking and not enough concentrating. So I'm just gonna keep quiet a moment while I look at where it is and how big it should be. Try and get it right. So as I'm doing this, I'm looking at each square. So rather than trying to draw glasses, I'm looking at where the lines are. I'm trying to draw these lines that are in each square and not really thinking about the fact that they're glasses. Because sometimes if you name a thing, it gets much harder to draw. And again, I can see this bit here is not quite right in my drawing. It needs to come in a bit. That looks better. It looks the same size anyway. Glasses are really hard to draw, but I almost always get the shape wrong, but it really doesn't matter. I'm aware that the shape is wrong, but no one ever comes back to me and says, you drew those glasses all wrong. So as long as they look like glasses, I think that's really all that matters. This is very scruffy. Thing is, if you do this when I do this in my sketchbook, it doesn't really matter how uneven it is. Just have to live with it because I've drawn it, I've inked it, and then it's there. So it's just that on Procreate, because you can keep correcting, there is a terrible incentive to keep correcting. I don't know, drive to keep doing it, and I have to stop myself because we're not really after realism anyway. We're after a characterful sketch. So I'm bringing this eye down a bit as well because I still think it's too big or too high up rather than too big. Yeah. And his eyelid is actually smaller than I'd drawn it. This line does sit on that square, so that can sit there. And again, if you're drawing eyes, it's generally easier to, if I can make this bigger, it's easier to draw this space, the white of the eye, to get the shape of the eye right. I will always draw this space rather than the eye space because I just find it so much easier. So I'm looking now to see if I've got that shape right. Kind of, I think so. And then the other eye, let's have a look. So yeah, and do what I've just done and zoom in to, you can zoom into a single square if you want to, and just draw it square by square. The point of Procreate is we have all these great tools. If they will help, use them. So that eye is much bigger than the other one, so I know I haven't done that right. So I'm just trying to figure out where I've gone wrong. I've just not placed it. I can see. I've got it coming right to the end of the square, and then if you look, his eye doesn't actually go to the end of that square on that side. So the squares help you see where you've gone wrong as well. I don't grid day to day, but if I was doing something where I needed accuracy, then I would grid. So if you watch the Portrait Artist of the Year show, you'll see that almost everyone on that program immediately starts with by gridding. And it's because they want to get a good likeness. Generally, day to day, I don't really worry about getting a good likeness. So I will just draw. I'll just eyeball it. But if for some reason you need a good likeness, then this is a good way of getting it, which is why those artists always, almost always use grids. I always think the ones who don't are so brave. It's pretty hard to get it right without one. So I'm going to draw these lines in at the edge of his mouth because I think they will help me. So that's not quite right, is it? So we have this line here, which is, I'm going to draw that one in first because I can see the shape and where it sits against the, trying to erase it now. Ah, just erase. I've made this eraser too small now. There we are. So I can see where this line sits against that square. So that's probably the easiest line to start with if you're trying, because it kind of sits like that. And then it comes sort of halfway down there. There we are. And then the mouth on the edge of the kind of smile line on the edge of his mouth. There's one there and there's another one there. So, and his moustache is more or less held within those lines. So this side I can see I've not gone out far enough. It needs to be a bit further over, so I'm going to move it over. So, I mean, it's more than halfway across that square, so it comes to around there, I think. So now that looks about right now. So, and at this point in Procreate, you can draw as many lines as you need to help you, because we can just erase them at the end. So I will often, well, in my sketchbook, I wouldn't draw the lines that the shadows create or things like that. When I'm drawing in Procreate, I usually will. You can add in those lines because you can remove them later. And what I sometimes do is go over the final picture with an eraser. So turn off everything else. I can show you. Let me show you on a different image. So let's take this one. Let me duplicate. Right. So what I will often do at the end is turn off my other layers. This one I merged everything. So I did have about 10 layers, but I merged them. Oh, so I can't show you on that one actually, because they're merged. I need the original. Okay, let me find an original one. That one will do. Oh, there he is. He's there. This is the original. So there are all my layers. And what I'll do at the end is usually turn off all the layers, except the top one. And then unlock the top one here. I'm going to duplicate it. I wouldn't normally duplicate. I'm duplicating it so that I can play around with it, and then I can just delete the layer at the end. So what I will often do is, I haven't duplicated it. I just created a new layer. There we are. I've duplicated it. I'm going to turn off my original, and then I'll get an eraser, and maybe not something that's got a bit of texture in it. Maybe I'll use a charcoal eraser. So I've got a 4B compressed charcoal, and then lower the opacity of the eraser. And then, I mean, you can see I've done it here. You can see that his eyebrows are much lighter than his fringe. That's because I got my eraser and I just, oh, I'm in the wrong layer. I need to be in this layer. Got my eraser and I just erased gently over the areas where I wanted the lines. If you can see there, but that is going lighter, a lot lighter. Where I wanted the lines to be lighter, I just erased them. So there are a few places where, particularly on his eyebrows, I did it. I'll quite often do it in the hair, if the lines in the hair are too dark. And sometimes if I've got I haven't got lots of crease marks on his face, but you could, for example, remove this one, because that was really there just to help me know where to colour. So you can go in at the end and you can play with your drawing. You can also change the colour of it. So you can change with that, play with that drawing. And that is often what I will do. So I'm going to put that one back. I'm going to put them back where they were. Delete the one I was just messing with. But yeah, at the end, you can go in and play around with your drawing and erase the lines that you don't want. So we'll go back to this one. So we'll just make them lighter. So I'll usually make some lighter. And going out and coming back makes you notice things as well. This is why you should take a break when you're drawing. I just noticed that his nose is totally wrong. I've got his nose flat at the bottom, but actually his nose is really goes up at an angle. So, and that was what going out and coming back in showed me. So this is why we tell people to leave drawings and come back to them later, have a break. So I will always take usually 2 or 3 days for drawing. Not because I need that amount of time, but because I know if I go out and come back, I'll see things that I have got wrong or that just aren't very accurate, and then I can change it. So let's draw his lip in. Draw that bottom lip. So what I meant by you can add in lines that you'll erase later. So I'll add in lines right now, showing me that, for example, he has that hair there, that stubble there. And this is the shape of his stubble, because I know I'll erase these lines at the end. I know they're not going to still be there. So I can just add them in now so that when I'm colouring, I have some guidelines. And I would do the same with shadows. There isn't that much shadow in this portrait, so I don't need to. But if there's a lot of shadow, I'll just draw the shadow shapes and get rid of them later. So we're definitely not going to finish this because I've spent a lot of time talking through the process. But I think that's the useful bit. So add in his neck. And if at the end you decide you really like the rest of the portrait, but you don't like the line work, you can just go over it and add another layer at the end. And then delete this layer. I'm only going to do 2 because I don't want to spend the whole class doing this. But sometimes when I've finished, I'm not happy with the sketch. So I just delete it and, well, I draw over it. It wouldn't delete it completely. I would draw over it and then delete the one that I did if it's a bit, because this one is a bit scruffy in places. But you can get rid of it and draw another one. So hair. So he has some hair coming up each side there. And then he has all these curls, which I'm just going to create curl shapes. I'm not remotely trying to draw his actual hair. I'm just going to create shapes that are curly and that fit more or less where his hair is sitting. So he's got a big curl there. Move his hair down a bit. Let's make this a bit bigger. So I want to get his hair kind of the shape that it is, but I'm not worried about, I mean, it would be really hard to draw all these individual curls anyway. And I do see some people who do it, who are very clever, but I have neither the patience nor I think the skill for it. So I'm just trying to make sure that it forms kind of a joined up shape. Yeah, so that's fine. So once I've got to that point, I can delete the one below, and there is our drawing. And oh, I'm trying to move this so you can see. I think it's a reasonable likeness. So I'm going to delete the layer below because I don't need that anymore. You can keep it and just turn it off if you'd rather. Really doesn't matter. So normally at this stage, even if I was using a drawing guide, I would turn it off at this point. To turn it off, I'm not going to, I'll leave it on because it will help us with our colouring. But if you did want to turn it off, you just go up here and just tap that button and it will disappear. I'm not going to make it disappear, but if you just tap that, then the drawing guide will be gone. But if you're going to keep it, I mean, it will help us in terms of adding colour, because again, you can see much more clearly where the highlights are when you've got a grid to line them up with. So we'll keep them for now. I'm actually thinking that I'm going to create a layer on top of this, and I'm going to just add the hair of his moustache and get rid of that outline. And again, add some marks for stubble and get rid of, so I'm doing it on another layer. So if you do want to add marks for stubble and hair, if you do them on another layer, so which is what I've done here, then you can delete them from the layer below easily. If you did them on the same layer, it would be hard to delete. It would be hard to delete these hard lines because you would be deleting the lines that we're going to draw for the moustache and stubble. So easier to do it on a different layer. So I'm going to lock the layer below for now to make sure I do it on a different layer. And then I'm just going to add some lines. Using the guidelines that I've got drawn here. And I'm going to add some lines to represent his stubble. I might decide at the end that I really don't like these lines, in which case I could just delete the layer. But for now, I'm going to add them. and they'll tell me where his stubble is and his moustaches, and it's just easier when I'm adding colour to know where those parts lie. But if you decide you don't like it or you want to do it another way, you can just delete it. So it's worth being experimental as well. Just experiment on a new layer. So I'm going to lock that layer and I'm going to unlock the layer below. So remember to lock and unlock, swipe to the left and then just tap the button. So now I can come in here and I can choose my eraser and I'll erase. Oh, no, I'm in the wrong layer. Right, make sure you're in the right layer. Choose your eraser. Yeah, and that looks much better without those hard lines around it. So same here. So I'm just deleting the lines that I drew to, I'm going to make my eraser a bit smaller. Just deleting the lines that gave me the shape. Rid of that. This line's a bit messy. So I might delete that or redraw it later. But for now, there we are. And it looks much neater without those lines showing me where to draw. So at this point, actually, I will keep them as separate layers, because then if we decide, you could merge this layer down and then they would all be part of one drawing. But if you keep it as a separate layer, if you decide you don't like those moustache marks later, you can just delete them and it'll be easy. So generally put things in different layers if you can, because it just makes it easier to delete them. So I've created a new layer and it's come in between those two, which I don't want it to do. So I'm just going to move it. So hold it, put your finger on it until the box pops and then just move it. Actually, I want to move it down, not up. I've moved it to the wrong place. Generally, we add colour, or I add colour underneath my drawing, not on top of it. So, and what you can do with these two is, oh, it's not going to let me because it's locked. Let me unlock. Yeah, you can turn them into a group. So just combine down. So it doesn't merge them, but it puts them together. And then we can lock both of them there. I don't know if you can. Yeah, you can lock the group. Ah, that was easy. You can just lock the group here by just sliding this, and then they're locked together. But then you've got your two face sketch layers together, which I should really name. So I don't know if it'll let me. No, it won't let me rename them either because I've locked them. So I'm going to name the group. So yeah, there we are. If you just tap on that, rename appears. And I'm just going to call it, I'm going to call it Sketch, actually. Sketch. So then you know that those two are the two sketch ones. You might think it's easy to tell. You can see your drawing in there. But once you have lots of layers, and particularly if you're using very light colours, it becomes quite hard to see what's on each layer. So you're trying to erase and you end up erasing on the wrong layer. And it can get a bit frustrating. So if you name them, it makes life a lot easier. So I'm going to rename this one. So you just tap on it and then up here to rename. And I'm going to call this one face because I'm going to add the face color to this first layer. So we've talked before about ways of choosing your colors. We could make a palette from his face. I find that palettes work great if you're, so let me remind you how to do a palette, sorry. Just tap, if you tap on your palette menu here, this will appear, and if you press the plus, you can create a new palette, and you can do it from a photo. So you could create a new palette from this photo. I find they don't work well with portraits. You tend to get lots of browns and you don't get a lot of the other colors. So I generally don't use them for portraits. I'll just pick colors myself. You can make a palette if you want, and they work great on things like, you know, if you've got a photo of flowers, you'll get great colors for the flowers. So definitely do that. They just don't work very well on the human face. You just end up with lots of quite sort of muddy skin tones. So I would always rather just pick colors. So I mean, these are the palettes that come with Procreate. So I'll very often just choose one of these. So I'd use one of these for the skin tone. And then if you put it on, if you actually draw with it, so I'm going to use this one, which is fourth from the end. If you draw with it and it's too dark, we can just go and pick a similar color that is lighter. So I usually just start with it. So I'm going to use the soft pastel, which I used to use a lot and I don't use very much anymore. But so I haven't used it for a long while, but it has really nice texture in it. So I'm just going to, is that too dark? Probably not, actually. I might make it bigger still. The bigger you make it, the quicker it is to do this. You can just do the whole face just like that, except that the mistake I've made is I've enlarged my canvas, and you can't color the whole thing when it's enlarged, because if I do that, I can't get to the bottom of his face. So I always try and make sure that my whole canvas is on the screen when I'm doing the skin tone. So we can just, there we are, easy. Very quick, very easy, but I'll then spend time going around and deleting or erasing. So maybe I'll use the same brush for erasing. So I've got the soft pastel brush eraser, but a bit smaller. So I'm just going to go around. So quickly at first, and then maybe more slowly. I mean, sometimes I don't do this till the very end. I'll just do the face. Maybe we'll carry on and just do the face. I won't go around the edges. So we can add tone to his face. So once I've got a color that I want to use, rather than using a palette, I'll just go down here, tap the square, and this shows me this color, and then I'll just pick colors from around it. So if I want something a bit darker, I'll just go down a bit. So maybe for where his skin tone is a bit darker, I'll move down a little bit. Up here, it tells you the color you've picked and the one you just used. So you can go back. If you use it and don't like it, you can just go back by tapping on the last one you used. And here is your history of the colors that you've been using. So I think that's the last 10 colors. Staying there, you can clear it, start again. If it's confusing, if you were doing something earlier and the colors are in there. So I'm going to come in and we can use the gridding again to show us where the darkest parts of skin tone are. So, I've still got my brush very big. I need to make it smaller. And you can see it over here. If you open it up, it gives you the size of your brush. If you have a favorite size that you like to use all the time, just press the plus and it'll save it. So I still think that might be a bit big. So at 5% maybe. And if I then tap the plus, it gives you a blue line. Those blue lines are ones you've saved. You can save lots of different ones. You don't have to have just one. So you could have 5 different sizes saved there. But generally, I find there are some brushes that I only use in one size. So I favorite it and keep the size. And then once you've favorited it, there's a minus. You can just click that to take it away if you decide you don't want it as a favorite. The same with opacity. If you come down with the opacity, I almost always use about 50 to 60%. Very rarely use anything on full opacity. So there, again, I can press the plus and it will save that for me. So that in future, you can just tap on the blue line. You can still choose other sizes right now, but the line stays there. So later, if I want to go back to that opacity, just tap on it and it goes back to it, which is very handy. It took me a long time to figure out how I could do that. And once I did, it was so useful. So I'm going to color around his eyes. So I'm going to use the grid to show me where the shade, where the kind of the darkest color goes to. And I don't think this color is right. So immediately it needs to be more red. So I'm going to go back and change it. So I want something that's more red. So you can use this. If you keep the dot where it is and move this, then you'll just get redder colors. And then we'll try that. Yeah, I think that's nicer. So we have a redder. I'm going to lower the opacity still because I think it's too dark. Actually, maybe I need to put it on multiply. Let's try that. So if you put your layer on multiply here, then the colors will show through each other. And with some brushes, it works really well. And with other brushes, it doesn't. So we just do it and try it if it's not. This is a brush I haven't used in a really long time. So I know that looks good. Yeah. I like the color and I like what it's doing. And what I like about the pastel brushes is they do have some texture in them, like pastels, which is nice. So I think I've gone a bit too dark on this eye. So I might go back. Just not use as much pressure. So this is one of those brushes that's pressure resistant, pressure dependent, sorry. So if you only use it lightly, because I want to keep the texture. So if I only use it lightly, then it keeps the texture. So, which I like. So he has this really great, I love drawing in the shadows of glasses, and you can see that there's a shadow there, which is a bit ready, but I'm going to make the brush much smaller to draw that in. Yep, I like that. And so I'm going to put some on his cheeks here. And again, you can use the grid to figure out how wide that needs to go. I still think the color's wrong. It needs to be a bit more orange. So, but we'll carry on, because otherwise I could spend the rest of the class just choosing a color that I like, which is not going to be a good move. So, but I will probably change that later by adding something more orange on top of it, because it's a bit too, maybe a bit too grey. So it's nice to use palettes, but sometimes just trying to figure it out yourself, I think you learn a lot more by just trying to figure out what the tones and the colors should be like. So I'm going to come down here and do his neck. So you could erase the around the edge of the skin tone and add these other layers as a clipping mask. But in some ways it's easier to just add all your layers and then do the erasing. So you can do it either way. The same with the creating the drawing grid that I was doing earlier. I'm sure there are lots of other ways of doing it as well that you might see other people use. So I'm just adding some shadow under his curls. And then I'm going to make this, I've made my brush a little bit smaller, and I'm going to add another layer here just to catch this shadow from the glasses, which you would think that when drawing glasses, it's the drawing of the glasses that makes them look most effective. But I always find it's drawing the shadow in the glasses that works the best. I'm going to come back to that again in a moment. So we are going to have his stubble here, so we don't necessarily need this color, but I'm going to add it just for the, oh, that is not the right smudge. So I just I just smudged with the brush we were using last week, which was the airbrush, which I don't want to do. So I'm going to go back to the, I'm going to use the same brush that we're drawing from for smudging. Generally a good idea. My smudge is a bit big too. It's generally a good idea to use the same brush. Although I have some favorites that I almost always use, which aren't the same brush. So I'm going to go back here to the palette, and I just want something a bit darker. So maybe I'm going to come down here just again for that, the glasses. That's better because that stands out now. I think my brush is a bit small now. Make it a bit bigger. But that looks good, yeah. Let's smudge it out a little bit. So now I'm going to erase so that we can see of what we've done. I'm going to make that smaller now. I'm getting nearer. So yeah, change the size of your eraser as you go. So if you're erasing big spaces, you can use a really big one. But as you get down to smaller spaces, it doesn't really matter with the hair, to be honest, unless someone's got very fair hair, because the hair is going to be dark. The skin tone won't show up anyway, so you don't really need to erase it. And I always like to leave a little bit around the edges anyway, that you can see here. I'm leaving a little bit of skin tone on the hair, just because when we draw hair, sometimes it's good to leave little gaps and have, you know, skin shows through around our forehead and other places. So I will usually leave a little bit there. But everywhere else, I like to get rid of all of it if I can. And a tip for erasing. So I have this on the light interface. I wonder if it will work. I usually switch it to the black interface. But yeah, if you just get rid of your background color, it's much easier to see where you're erasing. If you have the black interface, I have the white one so that you can see what I'm doing, but you can change up here. So again, it's in Canvas, and I'm trying to remember where it is. I think, is it in Canvas? No, it's in Preferences, sorry. I wonder why I couldn't find it. Yeah, it's in the Preferences. So you see it says light interface or dark interface. If you put on the dark interface, it's so much easier to see for erasing, because the color that is still on there really shows up. So if you're having trouble erasing, switch from the light to the dark interface and then turn it off again afterwards. I use the light interface so that you can see really clearly. If I had a dark one, it'd be much harder for you to see what I was doing. You can also, actually, if you're left-handed, you can switch this as well to left-handed. It's worth playing around with these. If you find it, if you don't like using this sidebar, you can get rid of it. There's all kinds of things you can do there. So it's worth having a look and exploring at some point. But I find it most useful just switching to the dark interface for erasing. But I'll usually do that at the end. When I'm finished, I'll do it just quite quickly at this point. But usually when I'm finished, I'll switch to that to see if there's bits, if there's areas where I haven't erased properly, and then just get rid of them. But it shows up much easier, much better without a background. So I'm trying each week that we do this to kind of give you tips without overwhelming you with information. I suspect I probably am overwhelming you with information, but some of these things, once you eventually start using them all the time, they become really useful. And quite often I take a class myself, you know, I'll go and sit in a Procreate class that someone else is teaching and then learn things that I've never used. And suddenly it's incredibly useful to know those things. I mean, I've been using Procreate probably for about 3 years before I understood how to use this layer menu here. So this menu, long time, and I didn't even know that you could lower the opacity of the layers using that menu. It took me a long time to discover that. And also when Procreate first came out, everybody was complaining that the paint brushes, the watercolor brushes, didn't work. And that's because we didn't understand how to use multiply. Well, I didn't understand, certainly. And I'm assuming everyone else who was complaining didn't understand. Once you learn to use how to use multiply, you can use almost any brush to get that transparent watercolor effect. So there's our face. I'm going to turn my background back on just by clicking in that box. And I can see that there's some bits here where I haven't erased properly, but I'll come back and do those later. So I haven't done his eyes. I need to, oh, using the wrong thing. I need to just erase inside his eyes. I don't really bother with anything else. All the other facial features you can draw on top. So I'm just gonna now create a new layer on top. make it a clip. Oh, no, I've moved it rather than doing what I meant to do. If you tap on it, the menu will appear. And we're going to make it a clipping mask. So here. So now what we draw on it will only appear on the areas we've drawn here. So nothing will appear around the edges. And then I'm going to just do those highlights. So I've opened up the box and up here is white. I'm just going to choose a sort of not quite white color from up there. And from what I remember, it's a long time since I've used the pastel brush, but I think it's pretty nice at doing highlights. Now this layer, because we want the highlights to show up on top of his skin, we're going to leave it at normal. I'm not going to change it to multiply. So, because I want the highlights to show up, and if you see, it's starting to appear. It works very nicely. I'm going to turn up the opacity because I've got the opacity a bit low. I turn up the size of my brush and I can draw this highlight here. Doesn't matter if I go over the lines because it won't show up. So this is what I think the chalks and charcoals are nicest for doing. They're just really nice at adding highlight color on top. So if you need to come in close, just enlarge it. And I do recommend enlarging it when you need to, rather than trying to draw it on a big screen. It's just much easier. So I'm just adding some of these highlights. We're in a different layer, so if I make a mistake, you can just erase it and it won't affect anything else. So he has highlights around his nose here. So, and with highlights, I usually start with a sort of a white or a very light yellow. But you can then add other colors. The highlight doesn't have to be one color. So I could do with making my brush a bit bigger here. Yeah, that's much quicker. So the highlight on this side of his face is quite lemon yellowy. So I feel like I might come in and add some yellow to it in a moment. Lots of illustrators, especially who use Procreate, often use in the layer menu here. They'll often put it on, if you put it on lighten, but it doesn't work very well with, so you can put it on lighten or you can put it on overlay. And I think overlay is designed to be used for highlights. So, but also if you were doing sort of a nighttime scene and you wanted light, say street lights lit up, then you would use overlay to create that kind of sense. So you can use it on glasses. It's quite, I'll show you. It's quite, if I put it on his glasses now, I'm gonna need to make it a bit bigger. It creates a sense of glasses. So you can make it light. Obviously you can make it lighter. It doesn't have to be like this, but quite often glasses will have like a dark streak down them and you can kind of add that, not a dark streak, a deeper color. So they'll have these kinds of stripes. So it's really good for using for glasses. I'm going to erase. I'm going to just go back, get rid of that because I don't really want it at this point. I might add some later, but yeah, put it on overlay for highlights and for glasses and you'll get a really nice effect. But I really recommend playing around with those layers because playing around with the layer menu because you get all different effects. And until you really play around with it a lot, it's hard to understand what the different elements do. I still don't understand what all of them do. Sometimes when I do them, it looks no different. But I will always experiment and play around and see what happens. And I'm constantly adjusting the opacity when I'm drawing. I'm doing this all the time. So that more parts are, and the size, but especially the opacity, so that more parts are more opaque than others. So do a little bit more on this ear, and then I'm going to stop and add some more pinks, I think. So I think that's okay for the highlights right now. I might add more later. I probably need to name the layer or I won't know what it is later. So highlights. Oh, spelled that wrong. And I might lock it for now, just so I don't mess it up. Yeah. So I'm going to go back to the face layer. So this layer here, and add some more pink, because I'm looking at the time. We're obviously not going to finish, but I will, I'll do what I can. And then, sorry, I'm just trying to choose a pink. Maybe we'll go with that one. So I've chosen a pink from there, but it's not quite what I want. So I'm just going to use that as my starting point to find, actually, they're quite red, aren't they? It's the pinks on his face. So maybe I'll go for a redder one, like that one. I will put the time-lapse video up on when it's finished. I'll put a time-lapse video up on Mighty Networks, so that you can see what I did after class. I mean, this class was much more about learning how to use a grid than the actual colouring. But I'd forgotten how nice these brushes were to use. I really ought to use them more. So it's nice for me. His lips are a bit pink, but I'll change that in a bit. I'm going to put quite a big layer of this sort of reddy colour on his neck, but I've made it more opaque. So, and because we're drawing the face layer, if you look at the layer menu, because we're drawing the face layer underneath the highlights, our highlights will stay. I'm not drawing over them. They'll stay put. So I'm going to add a bit more pink up around here. He needs some in his ears as well. So okay. Just checking. Have I got pink in all the right places? Probably need a bit more actually above his eyes. Okay, so I'm going to go back to the highlights layer, because I said I was going to add some yellow, and I'm going to add a very light yellow. So I need to unlock it. So swipe it to the left, unlock it, and then pick a yellow. Oh. So they're really nice. These are really nice yellows in the Procreate menus. I'm just going to go with the lightest one. And yeah, keep the opacity quite low. And I'm going to put it on top of where I've done white, because I want some of these highlights to be more yellow than white. I'm not going to be very careful about it. I'm just going in quite fast. And adding the yellow. I really like that. Yeah, I'm thinking I really should use these brushes more, because they're actually really nice. This brush, the pastel brush. So let's see if we can do some work on his eyes just before we have to go. So I'm going to create another layer. Actually, I should probably create some shadows as well. So I'm going to put that underneath. Maybe we'll make this the shadow layer. Now, just like we used the overlay, I don't know what you call it, but just like we used overlay to make the highlights light, you can use something like darken or darker color to make your darks darker. So let's try darken. And because the face is on multiply, it should still show through. And I usually go for something somewhere around here, something purpley blue. So maybe slightly darker. But again, I'm going to keep the opacity really low while I start. He doesn't have that many dark shadows, but yeah, that looks good. They're very dark. So I might just do it on normal. I might think that darken is going to make it too dark. Let's try with normal. Yeah, that looks better. So I'm just don't want too much, because I've already got darker skin tone there. But so this is showing through from underneath because we're on multiply. Again, I can add it under the glasses. If you're doing it and it feels too dark, don't worry. It does look dark. Mine looks dark. You can lower it. You can make it look less dark simply by, in a moment, when you've done the whole layer, you can go here, click on the N and lower the opacity to where you want it. So I never worry too much if it's too dark, because I know that there are things I can do to make it less dark. So some of these do look, you know, to me, they're looking a bit black, not purple enough. We can change the color and we can make them less dark with a variety of tips and tricks. So I'm going to add a shadow to the eye, because I know I always want a shadow in the eye. And for now, that's probably okay. So if you go into the menu here, you can just lower the opacity of it till it's a kind of around where you want it. So that looks better. So I don't, how far did I drop that? Around 6, maybe I'll go a bit lower, around 65%. And you might, you know, you might drop it to 65 right now and then decide later it needs to be higher, but it doesn't matter. You can adjust it as you go. And what I am going to do is just smudge out some of the edges a little bit, especially on the glasses. And then I'll lock that layer for now and add a new layer and put it underneath the shadow. So this is going to be his eye color. It needs to be underneath the shadow because I want the shadows. I want these shadows that I just drew in his eyes to show. So I think he has blue eyes. It looks like he has blue eyes. None of these blues are quite right. So I'm just going to pick one. I'm going to go down to the square again. And then, because I know then I'll get a blue square and just look at the square. Maybe, I don't know, that still doesn't look right. Blue eyes are usually sort of a bluey grey. So I think usually you have to come nearer to the grey to get something that will work. So I'm going to increase the opacity because I want his eyes to be reasonably dark. And I'll go into this later and add kind of texture and more color to the eyes. Right now, I just want basic eye color. Put a little black in for the pupils. Black is always this corner. White is always that corner. Whatever the other color is, it doesn't matter. You'll always find black and white. My brush is too big. Oh no, that's too much. I increased the opacity and I really shouldn't have done. Yeah, that's better. And when I was saying earlier that I go in and erase some lines at the end, I'll always erase the lines around the eyes because I'd rather just have the eye color. So we're almost out of time. So that's where we've got to. I think it's fairly accurate. It looks fairly accurate. So the grid worked. You can, if you were to finish your drawing and share it, I can show you that it doesn't show up. So if you share it, so I'm just going to save it as an image. And then if I go into my photos, I can show you that. Oh, I'm going the wrong way. There it is. And there's no grid on it. So I saved it with the grid on, but if the grid isn't there. And that's why we have to screenshot to keep the grid. So you can just save it and you won't have a grid. Also, if you want to turn it off while you're drawing, you just go to the canvas menu and turn it off and it will just go. So and if you put it back on, it'll be the size that you were last working with. So if you like this size grid, and then it will always appear at that size in your Procreate menu, because that's what you've been working with. I'm trying to think if there's anything else. So I will add a background to this. I will clean up all my erasing and I'll finish it. I'll finish his hair. I go in and add details, but usually if I'm working with something like a pastel, you can get fairly thin lines with the pastel. So I will try that and see if they work. But if they don't, then I'll just go and use a pencil. So I'll use a pencil brush from up here. Probably the Procreate pencil that I drew the drawing with. Because if you use too many different things, if you do a drawing with a pencil and then you use a different ink and something else, it can look a bit odd when you've got all these different lines. So since I use the Procreate pencil to do my line work, I'll probably use that for all the features as well. So I think that's all we have time for. I will finish this and I'll post it and you'll be able to see it on drawingXpressions. So I will share it to sorry, switch back to me. I'll share it to Instagram as well, so you can see it there if you'd rather. Well, I'll see you next week then.